Chapter 1: The Polisher and the Prodigy. The Grand Concordium of Arcane Arts did not smell of magic. Not the crackling ozone of a lightning spell or the sweet, cloying scent of a transfiguration charm, at any rate. Here, in the lowest levels of the floating city of Eredor, tucked away in the cavernous vault of antiquities, the air smelled of old parchment, metallic polish, and the quiet, dignified decay of forgotten power. It was the smell of Finian Goodbarrel's life. Finn ran a soft, velvet cloth over the cool, glass-like surface of the chronosphere, a device said to contain a single, captured second from the dawn of time. He didn't know if that was true, but he did know that if he used the wrong polishing agent, a compound with even a trace of Aetherium salts, the sphere would flash age 100 years, cracking into a spiderweb of useless crystal. It was this kind of knowledge, useless to a duelist or an enchanter, that filled Finn's head. He was a slight young man of 17, with a perpetually worried expression and a shock of mousy brown hair that refused to be tamed. While his peers were learning to conjure fireballs and weave illusions in the sun-drenched spires above, Finn was down here, the sole apprentice to the Arch-Curator, a glorified janitor for the world's most dangerous heirlooms. Gently, Finian, gently, a warm voice echoed in the vaulted chamber. Arch-Curator Elmsworth shuffled into view, his long silver beard nearly brushing the floor. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who had outlived mountains. The chronosphere is temperamental. It resents being reminded of the time it has lost. Yes, Arch-Curator, Finn mumbled, easing his pressure. He could feel the thrum of latent magic under his fingertips, a familiar and frustrating sensation. The Concordium's diagnostic mages had declared his own magical talent to be a thimbleful in an ocean. He could light a candle with a focus thought, but only if the wick was already warm. He could levitate a piece of parchment, but not if there was a breeze. He was a magical failure in the most magical place in Ethelgard. Elmsworth placed a wizened hand on Finn's shoulder. His touch was warm, smelling of dried herbs and honeyed tea. You have a different kind of talent, my boy. You see not just the object, but its story, its flaws. Anyone can fire a wand. Very few understand why it might misfire. Finn ducked his head, a flush creeping up his neck. The Arch-Curator's kindness was a small, warm hearth in the cold expanse of his own insecurity. I just follow the catalog, sir. Nonsense. The catalog says the Sunstone of Helios requires a biennial cleansing. It doesn't mention that doing so on a cloudy day will cause it to discharge its stored sunlight in a single, blinding flash. A fact you deduced from a scorched footnote in a forgotten grimoire. Elmsworth chuckled. You saved my eyebrows that day, Finian. A feat more impressive than any student's prize-winning illusion. Before Finn could stammer a reply, the grand brass doors to the vault hissed open. A figure stood silhouetted against the bright light of the upper halls, tall, confident, radiating an aura of barely contained power that made the dust motes in the air dance. Zara Vancroft. She was the Concordium's prodigy, a dueling champion with a lineage stretching back to the founding mages of Eredor. Her silver-white hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant braid, and her academy robes were immaculately tailored. In her hand, she held a wand of polished ebony, its crystalline tip glowing with a soft, cyan light. She didn't so much as glance at Finn, her sharp, intelligent eyes fixed on the Arch-Curator. Arch-Curator Elmsworth, she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. Headmaster Valerius requires the aegis of the First Guardian for the defensive ward calibrations. The threat from the rust wastes is escalating. Of course, Miss Bancroft. A wise precaution, Elmsworth said with a gentle smile. Finian, would you fetch it? Section Gamma, Alcove 7. Finn nodded, his heart thumping. He always felt like a particularly uninteresting insect under Zara's gaze. He scurried past her, careful to give her a wide berth. He thought he heard her mutter something that sounded suspiciously like wand polisher, but he didn't dare look back. He retrieved the aegis, a heavy shield-like artifact that hummed with protective energy, and brought it to her. As he held it out, his hand trembled slightly, and the shield tilted. Zara snatched it from his grasp with a flick of her wrist, levitating it effortlessly. Do try not to drop our history on the floor, Goodbarrel, she said coolly, not a hint of malice in her voice, just the flat, unassailable confidence of someone who had never known failure. "It's all you're trusted with." With a curt nod to Elmsworth, she turned and swept from the vault, leaving a trail of silence and the faint scent of winter frost. Finn's shoulders slumped. He was a footnote in his own life. Elmsworth sighed a long, weary sound. "Power does not always equate to wisdom, Finian. Remember that." He gestured to a small, heavily warded chest in the center of the room. It was carved from a single piece of petrified ironwood, banded with silver and covered in runes that seemed to squirm if you looked at them for too long. "Come. There is one more lesson for today." Finn had never been allowed to touch this chest. It was Elmsworth's personal project, the one artifact in the vault not listed in any public catalog. For generations, Elmsworth began, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone, the Concordium has guarded a seed, not of a plant, but of magic itself. The origin point from which the first sentient wands were grown. He laid his palm on the chest. The runes flared with a soft, green light, and with a series of soft clicks, the locks disengaged. A wave of unimaginable energy washed over Finn, pure and potent, like the smell of a forest after a thunderstorm. It was more magic than he had ever felt in one place, and his own thimbleful of talent resonated with it, a tiny bell chiming in the presence of a cathedral organ. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded green velvet, was a piece of wood. It was no bigger than Finn's thumb, gnarled and ancient, yet it seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light. It wasn't an artifact. It felt alive. The heartwood core, Elmsworth breathed. It is a nexus of natural magical attunement. Any wand crafted with this at its center would be a part of the world's own soul. It would need no wielder, for it would wield the magic of Ethelgard itself. Finn stared, mesmerized. But who could possibly control such a thing? No one, the Archcurator said grimly. That is why it has remained hidden. In the wrong hands, it could be used to enslave or unravel the very fabric of magic. There are those who see power not as a tool for creation, but simply as a thing to be collected, to be hoarded. It was then that the first tremor hit. It was not the gentle, rocking motion of Eredor's altitude enchantments recalibrating. This was a violent, metallic shudder, as if the floating city itself had been struck by a giant's hammer. The artifacts in the vault rattled on their shelves. The chronosphere let out a low, mournful hum. A deep, resonant bell began to toll from the central spire, not the cheerful chimes that marked the passing of classes, but a frantic, discordant clang, the Concordium's alarm. "What's happening?" Finn cried, stumbling to maintain his balance. Elmsworth's face was pale, his eyes wide with a dawning horror he seemed to have feared for years. "He's here. He actually did it." Before Finn could ask who, the grand brass doors to the vault didn't hiss open. They exploded inward. Shrapnel of superheated metal screamed through the chamber. Finn threw himself to the floor, covering his head as a shower of brass and stone rained down. When the dust began to settle, he peered through the haze. Standing in the ruined doorway were figures that defied nature. They were soldiers, but not of flesh and blood. They were automatons, forged of polished steel and whirring brass clockwork, their single glowing red lenses for eyes scanning the room with inhuman precision. They moved with a ticking, uncanny synchronicity, their metal feet clicking on the stone floor in a perfect, terrifying rhythm. And through their ranks strode their master. General Malakor was a monument to magi-tech horror. He was easily 7 feet tall, his body a grotesque fusion of enchanted artifice and salvaged human parts. One arm was a pincer-like claw of gleaming chrome, the other a multi-jointed limb ending in delicate, spider-like digits. His legs were piston-driven constructs that hissed with every step. Encased in his chest, behind a plate of reinforced crystal, a captured lightning elemental pulsed and churned, a storm in a bottle that served as his heart. His face was the only organic part left, a scarred, sneering visage half covered by a riveted steel plate where his left eye should have been. But the most chilling part was his back. A complex harness of brass and copper held a collection of wands, at least a dozen of them, stolen trophies of fallen wizards. The ebony wand of a shadowmancer, the crystalline rod of an illusionist, the gnarled oak staff of a druid, all connected by a network of glowing Aetherium tubes that snaked into Malakor's own mechanical spine. He was not just a wizard. He was a legion. Elmsworth. Malakor's voice was a grating harmony of metal and warped magic, a sound that scraped at the soul. Still guarding the old bones, I see. How fitting. You always were a relic. Malakor. Elmsworth straightened, his fear replaced by a steely resolve. He drew his own wand, a simple, elegant staff of silver birch. You are not welcome in this place of knowledge. Malakor let out a laugh that sounded like grinding gears. Knowledge? Knowledge is a cage. Power is freedom. You hid in your libraries while I was remade in the fires of true progress. Flesh is weak, old man. It fails. It breaks. Artifice is eternal. He gestured with his claw. I have come for your collection. The wands of the archmages. And the little splinter you've kept hidden for so long. His single, organic eye locked onto the open chest. The heartwood core. Give it to me, and I will grant you a clean end. Never, Elmsworth whispered. He raised his wand, and a shield of shimmering, woven light erupted in front of him and Finn. Finian, stay behind me. Malakor sneered. A noble, pointless gesture. He didn't even draw a wand. He simply pointed his clawed hand, and from the harness on his back, 3 wands flared to life simultaneously. A jet of black fire, a bolt of crackling frost, and a shimmering curse of disintegration shot forth, converging on Elmsworth's shield. The impact was deafening. The air itself seemed to scream. Elmsworth's shield buckled, the light flickering violently. He was a powerful wizard, one of the most learned in the world, but he was one man against 3, his magic channeled through a single focus. Malakor's artifice allowed him to bypass the most fundamental law of wand magic, wielding the stolen power of his victims as if it were his own. You see, Malakor grated, taking a step forward. Your traditions are chains. I have broken them. Elmsworth grunted, his knuckles white on his staff. You haven't broken them, you monster. You've perverted them. This power is unstable. It's not yours. To Finn's shock, he saw Elmsworth was right. For a split second, the jet of black fire flickered, its color shifting to a sickly green. The stolen wands on Malakor's back vibrated disharmoniously, a brief but noticeable tremor running through his mechanical body. Malakor's sneer tightened into a snarl. He had felt it too. A momentary imperfection. Soon to be corrected. He raised his hand again, and this time, 5 wands lit up. The assault was overwhelming. Elmsworth's shield shattered into a million motes of fading light. The arch-curator was thrown backward, his simple silver birch wand flying from his hand and clattering across the floor. He landed in a heap, a dark stain spreading across the front of his robes. Arch-curator. Finn screamed, scrambling to his side. The old man was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. Finian, he choked, blood dotting his lips. Listen to me. Knowledge is your wand. He pressed something small and warm into Finn's palm, the heartwood core. It pulsed gently, like a frightened bird's heart. He cannot be allowed to have it, Elmsworth rasped, his eyes losing focus. It will not attune to his machine soul. But he will use it to power his abominations. Run, Finian. Run and do not stop. His hand fell limp. The gentle, kind light in his eyes flickered and went out. A cold, bottomless dread washed over Finn, so absolute it felt like drowning. The arch-curator, his mentor, his only friend in this entire floating city, was gone. A touching scene. Malakor's metallic voice cut through his grief. Now boy, the core. Give it to me. Your life is a trifle, but I am not needlessly wasteful. The clockwork soldiers began to advance, their synchronized footsteps a death knell. Finn's mind went blank with terror. He was nothing. A polisher. A thimbleful of magic. He couldn't fight. He couldn't even talk back to a snide student. Knowledge is your wand, Finian. Elmsworth's last words echoed in his mind. Run. He had to run. Clutching the heartwood core, so tightly his knuckles were white, Finn kicked off the ground and scrambled away, deeper into the vault's labyrinthine corridors. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a destination. He just ran. Behind him, he heard Malakor's annoyed hiss. "Do not let him escape. Bring me the core." And the boy's head. The ticking of the automatons grew louder, faster, chasing him through the maze of shelves. He dodged past display cases and under ancient tapestries, his breath burning in his lungs. The whole Concordium was shaking now, the sounds of battle and crumbling masonry echoing from above. He burst through a service door into a side passage, a narrow corridor used by curators to move artifacts. The passage ended in a heavy stone door that led to the lower hangar bay. It was sealed shut with a complex arcane lock. He was trapped. The clicking of metal feet rounded the corner behind him. 2 of Malakor's automatons were there, their red eyes glowing in the dim light. They raised their arms, which morphed into crackling energy projectors. Finn squeezed his eyes shut, pressing himself against the cold stone door, the warm heartwood core a stark contrast against his terrified skin. This was it. This was his pathetic, unremarkable end. Suddenly, a searing bolt of cyan light shot past his head, striking one of the automatons square in its optical lens. The machine seized up, sparks flying from its joints, and collapsed in a heap of twitching metal. Finn's eyes flew open. Zara Vancroft stood at the other end of the corridor, her ebony wand held steady, her face pale but set with grim determination. Her immaculate robes were torn and smudged with soot. "Get away from the door, you idiot," she snapped, already weaving another spell. A second bolt of energy slammed into the remaining automaton, blasting it back against the wall. "I can't. It's locked," Finn stammered. Zara's expression soured. "Of course it is." She glanced back over her shoulder. The sounds of more automatons were approaching, a legion of ticking, whirring death. "Well, don't just stand there, good barrel. Do something." "I can't do anything." Finn's voice cracked with despair. "I don't have any magic." "Then you're useless," she hissed, firing another defensive blast down the main corridor. They were trapped. Cornered. The pounding of metal feet grew louder. Finn's terrified gaze darted around the corridor, looking for anything, any hope. His eyes fell upon a large, framed tapestry hanging on the wall next to him. It depicted a chaotic, swirling scene of an ancient elven forest. The shifting tapestry of Eldoria. His mind, a library of seemingly useless facts, suddenly presented him with a page. Catalog entry 734B. The shifting tapestry of Eldoria. Note: minor spatial distortion properties. Originally used as a short-range, one-way emergency escape route. Destination is unstable and randomized within a 100-foot radius. Activation: physical contact with non-magical organic matter while under extreme duress. A footnote: scorched and forgotten, just like the one that had saved the Archcurator's eyebrows. "Knowledge is your wand." "Zara," he yelled, his voice finding a strength he didn't know it possessed. She glanced at him, her eyes wide with frantic energy. "What?" 4 more automatons turned into their corridor, their red eyes locking onto them. "Trust me," Finn yelled. He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and lunged sideways, slamming his free hand and hers against the ancient, woven fabric of the tapestry. Chapter 2. The Whispering Woods. The pristine, sun-drenched marble of the Grand Concordium was a ghost's memory. In its place was mud, a cold, greedy mud that sucked at Finn's worn-out boots with every frantic step. Rain, as fine and sharp as spun glass, slicked his mousy brown hair to his forehead and trickled down his neck, a constant, miserable reminder of their fall from the floating city of Eridor. They had escaped Malakor's initial assault not through skill or bravery, but by a desperate leap into a refused chute, a long, spiraling slide that had unceremoniously spat them out into the wilds of the lowlands. Ahead of him, Zara Vancroft moved with a duelist's grace, even here in the gnarled chaos of the Whispering Woods. Her Concordium uniform, a fine cerulean blue, was torn at the sleeve and smeared with filth, but she held her wand, a slender, elegant rod of silver birch, with the unwavering steadiness of a master. A flick of her wrist sent a crackling bolt of kinetic force smashing into a low-hanging branch that blocked their path, splintering the wood into a shower of damp chips. She didn't even break her stride. Keep up, good barrel, she snapped over her shoulder, her voice as sharp as the chill air. Your dawdling will get us both collared and dismantled. Finn flinched at the use of his surname, a familiar sting of dismissal. In the hallowed halls of the academy, he was always just good barrel, the boy who polished things. He clutched the small, weighty object in his satchel, its contours pressing against his ribs. The Heartwood core. Arch-Curator Elmsworth's last, desperate gambit. The smooth, warm wood felt impossibly heavy, a burden of trust he was certain he would fail. I'm trying, he wheezed, his lungs burning. He was a creature of libraries and quiet vaults, not cross-country flights for his life. Every root seemed placed to trip him, every thorny vine to snag his simple tunic. It's just, I'm not. You're not a wizard, I'm aware, Zara cut in, her tone laced with a venomous impatience. She stopped, spinning to face him, her violet eyes blazing with frustration. By the 7 ethers, why did it have to be you? Why did the Arch-Curator give the core to you? The question hung between them, accusing. Finn had no answer. He had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times in the past hour. Elmsworth, with his dying breath, had looked past a dozen more powerful, more capable students. He had looked past Zara herself, the Academy's dueling champion, and pressed the key to Malakor's ambition into the hands of his wand polisher. I don't know, Finn said, his voice small. He just told me to protect it. To keep it from the General. Zara's lip curled in a sneer. Protect it? You can barely protect your own footing. You are a liability. That core is one of the foundational artifacts of modern wand crafting. It could amplify a master wizard's power 100-fold. In your hands, it's a paperweight. He winced, his gaze falling to the forest floor. She was right. The Heartwood core was a legend, a piece of the first tree from which all magical conduits were said to have descended. It was a nexus of raw, untamed magic. In his pocket, it was just a lump of wood. He was a thimble, and it was the ocean. A sudden, unnatural sound cut through the forest's gentle murmurs. It wasn't the call of a bird or the rustle of a wild animal. It was a rhythmic, metallic click-whir that scraped against the nerves. It was the sound of artifice. Zara's entire demeanor shifted. The aristocratic disdain vanished, replaced by a coiled, lethal focus. Down, she hissed, grabbing the collar of Finn's tunic and yanking him behind the moss-covered girth of a fallen log. Finn's heart hammered against his ribs. He peered over the decaying wood, his breath catching in his throat. Through the mist-shrouded trees, they came. There were 3 of them, moving with a fluid, insectoid grace that was deeply unsettling. They were Malakor's hunters, his coghounds. Forged from brass and blackened steel, they were skeletal canine forms, their heads dominated by a single, multifaceted crystal lens that swiveled independently, casting beams of pale blue light that sliced through the gloom. Where their paws should have been, they had 3-pronged claws that dug into the soft earth without sinking, leaving precise, geometric tracks. The click-whir was the sound of their intricate leg gears spinning. They're tracking us, Zara whispered, her knuckles white where she gripped her wand. There must be a tracer glyph on us from the chute. Finn's mind, a library of artifact lore, instinctively flipped through its catalogs. Standard Concordium emergency systems, subsection refuse disposal. Level 3 magical trace glyphs, effective range 5 leagues, decay period 12 hours. It will fade, he whispered back, the information bubbling up unbidden. But not for hours. We can't outrun them. They don't tire. Then we fight, Zara stated, her voice a low growl. Fight them? Finn squeaked. Zara, those are Series 7 stalkers. Their chassis is reinforced with quenched iron, impervious to kinetic spells below a master-level casting. Their optic lens can refract most light-based charms, and they can calculate a spell's trajectory in a microtick. Arch-Curator Elmsworth's lecture on. Enough of your textbook recitation, good barrel, she snarled. I don't need the manual. I need a distraction. She looked at him, her eyes cold and calculating. You're going to be it. Before Finn could protest, she was already moving. When I give the signal, run. Left. Make as much noise as you can. I'll take them from the flank. The thought of drawing the attention of those clockwork predators sent a wave of pure, unadulterated terror through him. His legs felt like lead. He was going to die here in the mud, torn apart by gears and claws, all because he was the perfect bait, slow, clumsy, and magically useless. He thought of Elmsworth's kind eyes, the way the old man would listen patiently as Finn explained the intricate flaws in a grimoire's binding or the specific polish needed for a moonsilver amulet. He saw something in you, Finian. Don't let it be for nothing. Zara raised her wand, a soft silver light beginning to coalesce at its tip. She gave him a sharp, impatient nod. No. Finn scrambled to his feet and ran. He crashed through undergrowth, his arms flailing, deliberately snapping twigs underfoot. He yelped as a thorny branch scraped his cheek, the sting of it lost in the greater panic. The clickwhir sound immediately changed pitch, growing faster, angrier. The blue beams of light swiveled and converged on his fleeing form. He was a moth pinned in a searchlight. Fulman victim. Zara's voice rang out, sharp and clear as a bell. A chain of brilliant white lightning leaped from her wand, not at the hounds, but at a towering, dead oak tree just behind them. The spell struck with a deafening crack, and the ancient tree groaned, its trunk exploding in a cascade of splinters. With a final, shuddering sigh, it began to topple, crashing down directly in the hound's path. Two of the automatons skittered back with impossible speed, but the third was too slow. The massive trunk slammed into it, crushing its brass torso with a sickening crunch of tortured metal. The blue light in its lens flickered and died. Finn stared, awestruck. He had seen Zara practice in the dueling courtyards, but this was different. This wasn't sport. It was survival, and her power was a beautiful, terrifying thing to behold. The two remaining hounds, undeterred, simply altered their course, their legs pumping as they renewed their pursuit of Finn. They ignored Zara completely. Their directive was clear: retrieve the source of the tracer glyph. Retrieve Finn. Why are they still after me? He cried out, stumbling over a root and landing hard on his hands and knees. The primary target protocol. Zara shouted, frustration coloring her tone as she ran to catch up. She sent another bolt, a concussive blast, that slammed into the lead hound's side, staggering it but doing no visible damage. They're locked onto the glyph. They won't change targets until it's neutralized. They were running again side by side. The forest was a blur of green and brown. Finn's lungs were on fire, a stitch burning in his side. The hounds were gaining. Their clicking was no longer a distant threat, but an immediate, horrifying percussion just yards behind them. I can't keep this up, Zara. Finn gasped, his vision starting to swim with black spots. You have to. Desperation clawed at him. They were going to be caught. Zara's power was incredible, but it was finite. She couldn't keep blasting them forever, and her spells weren't stopping them, only slowing them. His mind raced, not with spells or battle tactics, but with the dry, dusty facts Elmsworth had drilled into him. He saw pages of text, diagrams, footnotes. Whispering woods, endemic flora and fauna, geological composition. And then a memory sparked. It wasn't from a lecture on combat or artifice. It was from a dusty tome on ecological warding, a book Elmsworth had made him catalog because its cover was flaking. The bogmoss indigenous to the lowland fens, colloquially known as glimmerdamp, grows prolifically on the northern face of ironwood trees. Its high ferrous content and unique cellular structure create a low-level, chaotic magical field, frequently used by local fauna to obscure their presence from scrying predators, a natural thaumaturgic static. Thaumaturgic static. A magical smokescreen. The moss. Finn yelled, grabbing Zara's arm and pulling her to a stop. She rounded on him, furious. Have you lost your mind? We need to run. No. Look. He pointed, his finger trembling, at the base of a huge, dark-barked tree. A thick carpet of deep green moss, shot through with faint, coppery veins, clung to its north side. Glimmerdamp moss. It interferes with magical signals. The tracer glyph. It can hide us. Zara stared at him, then at the moss, her expression a mixture of disbelief and utter contempt. You want us to stop and play in the dirt based on a passage from some moldy book? The clicking of the hounds was deafeningly close. They had maybe 30 seconds. Yes, Finn insisted, a surge of desperate certainty overriding his usual timidity. For the first time, he wasn't asking, he was telling. Elmsworth taught me that knowledge of a thing's nature is its own kind of power. This is not a guess, Zara. It's a fact. Their sensors are magical, not physical. We can blind them. He didn't wait for her permission. He scrambled to the tree, scooping up handfuls of the cold, metallic-smelling moss and the thick, black mud beneath it. He smeared it over his arms, his face, his tunic, anywhere the glyph might be. The mud was icy, but the conviction was afire in his belly. For a heartbeat, Zara just watched him, her perfect duelist's poise clashing with the sheer absurdity of the situation. Then, with a curse that would have earned her a week's detention, she knelt and did the same, her movements quick and efficient. This had better work, good barrel. She hissed through gritted teeth as she smeared a streak of black mud across her aristocratic cheekbone. They pressed themselves into a shallow depression behind the ironwood's massive roots, pulling loose bracken and leaves over themselves. Finn held his breath, his body rigid. The heartwood core in his satchel felt like a miniature sun, and he was terrified its aura would betray them. The click roar grew louder, and then the first hound came into view. It stopped less than 20 feet away. Its crystalline head swiveled, the blue beam of its sensor light cutting a swathe across the forest floor. The beam swept towards them, and Finn squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable shriek of discovery. The light passed directly over their hiding spot, and kept going. Finn's eyes shot open. The hound stood motionless for a moment, its headlens tilting as if in confusion. Its internal mechanisms whirred in a questioning, frustrated pattern. The second hound joined it. Together, they scanned the area, their blue lights sweeping back and forth. Their sensors, which had been locked onto Finn with unerring precision just moments before, were now blind, searching for a signal that had vanished into a haze of natural static. After a long, agonizing minute, the lead hound emitted a low, discordant chime, a signal of failure. They turned in unison and, with that same unervingly fluid gait, trotted off into the woods, continuing in the direction Finn had been running. They were following a ghost signal, a last known trajectory. Silence descended, broken only by the drip of water from the leaves and the frantic pounding of Finn's own heart. He and Zora lay still for a full 5 minutes before she finally let out a shaky breath. "It worked," she whispered, the word a puff of white in the cold air. She looked at him, and for the first time, the contempt in her eyes was gone. It was replaced by something else, something he couldn't quite name. A grudging, bewildered respect. "How in the world did you know that?" "I read it," Finn said simply, pushing himself into a sitting position. He was cold, filthy, and trembling with adrenaline, but a small, unfamiliar warmth bloomed in his chest. It felt like pride. The Archcurator always said there's no such thing as useless knowledge. They found a small, dry alcove under an overhang of rock to wait out the rest of the day. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the gnawing cold. Zara, using a precise, whisper-quiet charm, coaxed a tiny, smokeless flame to life in her palm, its warmth a meager but welcome comfort. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice low as she stared into the flickering light. The firelight softened the hard edges of her face, revealing the faint traces of fear she hid so well. "Malakor won't stop with a few hounds. He'll send something worse." Finn nodded, hugging his knees to his chest. "He wants the core." Elmsworth said it was the key. "Malakor collects wands, but the wands are just vessels. The core, it could let him unify their power. Wield them all as one." "A walking arsenal," Zara murmured, the implications dawning on her. "He wouldn't just be a general. He'd be a god of war." She looked at Finn, her gaze intense. "We have to get it somewhere safe." "But where?" "The Concordium has fallen. The capital will be his next target." Finn thought back, sifting through more of Elmsworth's lessons. They weren't lessons about grand strategy, but about people. About the artisans, the enchanters, the renegades who existed on the fringes of the magical world. "There's a place," he said slowly, an idea taking shape. "The city of Rusthaven. It's in the Ironjaw Mountains. It's a city of artificers, machinists, and scrappers. They work with clockwork and artifice, but they despise Malakor. They believe he perverted the craft, twisted it from creation to tyranny." He met her gaze, his own eyes reflecting the small flame. More importantly, it's home to a man named Master Valerius. He was Malakor's contemporary, his rival, before he went into exile. Elmsworth said he's the only artificer alive who understands the general's designs better than the general himself. Zara considered this. Her strategic mind was clearly at work, weighing the risks and possibilities. A city of mechanics. They wouldn't bow to a traditional wizard, but they might help us against Malakor. She gave a small, decisive nod. It's a long shot, but it's better than waiting here to be found. Rusthaven it is. A fragile truce settled between them, born of shared terror and a single, desperate goal. For the first time since their frantic escape, Finn felt a flicker of hope. They had a plan. They had a destination. They were alive. As dusk began to bleed through the forest canopy, painting the woods in shades of bruised purple and gray, a new sound reached them. It wasn't the click whir of the hounds. This was a softer, more sinister noise, the whisper of oiled gears and a low, resonant hum. A figure stepped into the clearing before their shelter. It was taller and leaner than the hounds, its form unnervingly humanoid. Its body was a lattice of polished chrome and dark steel, its face a smooth, impassive mask from which a single, crimson optic glowed. It didn't scan the forest wildly. Its head was tilted, as if listening to something they couldn't hear. Then, a voice emerged from a grill in its chest. A voice that was a perfect, synthesized imitation of General Malakor's own cold, metallic rasp, devoid of any emotion but possession. The general values his collection, little scavenger. Do not make him ask for his property twice. Chapter 3. The Iron Chantry. The Iron Chantry was not built. It was inflicted upon the mountain. It clawed its way up the sheer black granite of the Dragon's Tooth Peaks, a fortress of gears, pistons, and tarnished brass that bled smoke into the crisp alpine air. Where a wizard's tower would soar with elegant spires, the chantry squatted, a monument to brutal efficiency. Its rhythmic, metallic heartbeat pulsed through the very stone under Finn's worn boots, a constant, sickening thrum that felt like the world's most malevolent clock. "This is insanity," Finn whispered, his breath pluming in the cold. He clutched the simple leather pouch at his belt, the faint, warm thrum of the heartwood core within the only comfort in this desolate place. "We can't just walk in." Zara Vancroft, perched on a rocky outcrop ahead of him, didn't turn. Her dueling cloak, now tattered and stained from their flight through the whispering woods, whipped in the wind. "We aren't just walking in, good barrel. We are infiltrating. There's a difference." Her voice was sharp, brittle with a frustration that had been simmering for days. She had tried every scrying spell she knew to locate a weakness, to find an entry point, but the chantry was shielded by dampening fields that swallowed magic like a sponge. "A difference of semantics," Finn muttered, scrambling to catch up. "The clockwork sentinels will still grind us into paste." "Then you'd best be useful for once," she shot back, finally fixing him with an icy glare. Her usual aristocratic composure was frayed, replaced by the grim determination of a cornered animal. "Your master gave you the core. He must have believed you could do more with it than just polish it. What does your book learning say about a place like this?" Malakor was a battle mage before he became it. He would have studied classic fortress design. Finn flinched at the mention of Arch-Curator Elmsworth, the memory of his master's fading light still a fresh wound. But Zara's barb hit its mark. He wasn't a wizard. He wasn't a duelist. He was a cataloger. An archivist. His mind was a vault of seemingly useless facts, of footnotes and appendices that wizards like Zara deemed beneath them. He closed his eyes, forcing away the terrifying vista of the fortress and focusing on the sound, the rhythmic ka-chunk. He's ka-tunk. Highest. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. "He's using a geothermal vent," Finn said, his own voice surprising him with its clarity. "The mountain is volcanically active. Malakor is harnessing the steam to power the primary mechanisms. Old magi-tech principle. Inefficient, but powerful." The Grand Concordium's own heating system was based on a similar, albeit more refined, design. Zara raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Fascinating. Can you bore the sentinels to death with that fact?" "No," Finn said, a flicker of confidence kindling in his chest. But a system that large, running that hot, needs a massive coolant intake. It can't be shielded like the rest of the fortress, or it would cook itself from the inside out. He'd need to draw water from a subglacial river. And where there's an intake, there's an outflow. Great. Probably for thermal discharge. For the first time since they'd fled the Concordium, Zara looked at him with something other than contempt. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was a calculating curiosity. Show me. It took them 2 hours of perilous climbing along the mountain's frozen spine. But Finn was right. Tucked away in a deep crevasse, obscured by a perpetual cloud of steam, was a colossal, iron-barred grate. Hot, foul-smelling water gushed from it, carving a steaming channel down the mountainside. The bars were as thick as Finn's arm, but decades of mineral-rich water had corroded the lock mechanism. Zara's eyes lit up. A simple disintegration charm should. No. Finn hissed, grabbing her arm. She recoiled as if he were a slug. The whole fortress is a machine, Zara. That lock is probably connected to a pressure sensor. Break it, and an alarm will sound from here to Eredor. It's not a magical lock. It's a mechanical one. He pointed at the tumblers, rusted and seized. Arch-Curator Almsworth made me study mundane lock sets. Said a wizard who can only open magical doors is only half prepared. It's a 5-pin tumbler system. Archaic. He pulled 2 thin metal strips from the mending kit Almsworth had insisted he carry, a tension wrench and a pick. Zara watched, her expression a mixture of disbelief and impatience, as Finn's slender, nervous fingers went to work. His hands, so clumsy with a wand, moved with a strange, delicate precision. He pressed his ear to the cold metal, listening to the faint clicks as he coaxed the rusted pins into place. The thrumming of the fortress seemed to travel up the tools, into his bones. He felt less like he was breaking in and more like he was trying to understand the behemoth's language. With a final gritty click, the mechanism groaned in protest and swung open. Zara stared, speechless for a moment. How? Sometimes the oldest keys are just bits of metal, Finn said, a flush of pride warming his cheeks. He gestured for her to enter first. As she squeezed through, she paused, her gaze lingering on him. Don't get used to giving me orders, good barrel. The words were sharp, but the bite was gone. The inside of the iron chantry was a hell of industry. They navigated a labyrinth of dripping, copper-green pipes and walkways suspended over chasms filled with grinding gears the size of houses. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, hot oil, and the faint, coppery tang of raw Aetherium. Clockwork sentinels patrolled the gantries, gleaming brass arachnids with crystalline blue eyes that swept the darkness. Finn and Zara moved in the shadows, their progress dictated by the rhythmic clang and hiss of the machinery, each footstep a gamble. Finn's encyclopedic knowledge, once a source of mockery, was now their lifeline. He identified the purpose of conduits by their harmonic hum, steering them away from high-energy lines. He recognized the patrol patterns of the sentinels from a diagram in an old artificer's journal. Zara, for her part, was their shield. Twice, a patrolling drone's searchlight strayed too close, and a silent, wandless spell from her, a flick of the wrist that subtly bent the light around them, saved them from discovery. They were a dysfunctional but effective team, the brain and the blade, the knowledge and the power. Finally, guided by a growing concentration of etheric energy that made Finn's teeth ache, they found their way to the heart of the machine. It wasn't a throne room, but a laboratory, a vast, circular chamber that was equal parts workshop and museum. At its center, suspended in a crackling vortex of energy, was General Malakor. He was larger and more terrible than Finn remembered from the attack. The last vestiges of his human form were gone, swallowed by a masterpiece of cruel artifice. His body was a towering construction of polished steel, brass, and whirring gyroscopes. Aetherium fluid pulsed through crystal tubes woven through his chassis like a circulatory system. His head was a helmet of smoked quartz, and behind it, a single, baleful red optical sensor glowed with malevolent intelligence. But it was his arms that drew Finn's horrified gaze. They were not arms, but articulated frameworks. And mounted upon them, integrated directly into the machinery, were wands. Dozens of them. Finn recognized them instantly, his heart plummeting. The Rowan Wand of Eldrin, the serpent's tooth of Salazar, the star-shard scepter of the First Concord. Legendary artifacts, the life's work of the greatest wizards in history, were now little more than modular weapon emplacements on a monster's chassis. And there, in the most prominent position on Malakor's right arm, was the elegant silver birch wand of Archcurator Elmsworth. I confess, a voice echoed through the chamber, synthesized and devoid of warmth, like stones grinding together. I did not anticipate such vermin to scuttle so deep into my workings. Malakor turned, the motion unervingly smooth for a creature of his size. The red eye fixed on them. The Vancroft prodigy, and the curator's little pet. You have brought me the Heartwood core. A foolish, yet efficient delivery. Zara stepped forward, her own wand, a simple but elegant length of holly, snapping into her hand. Her fear was a tangible thing, but her pride was stronger. You are a desecration, Malakor. A parasite feeding on the legacy of true wizards. Legacy. The synthesized voice held a note of something like amusement. Legacy is a monument to failure. To death. I have surpassed it. Flesh is weak, sentimental. It fails. It breaks. It dies. I have shed that weakness. I have become persistent. He raised his right arm. Elmsworth's wand pulsed with an unfamiliar, aggressive light. Your master was a fool. He clung to tradition. He spoke of balance and harmony. But the only truth in this world is power. The power to endure. The power to collect. The power to perfect. You know nothing of perfection, Zara snarled. A bolt of pure white energy, a Vancroft family specialty known as the Lancing Light, erupted from her wand. It was a spell that could punch through fortress walls. Malakor didn't even move. A different wand on his left arm, the obsidian rod of the Shadow Mage Threx, flared to life. It didn't cast a counterspell. It seemed to simply unravel Zara's attack in midair, absorbing its energy with a greedy hiss. Predictable, Malakor's voice droned. Raw power, crudely applied. You wield one instrument. I am the orchestra. He retaliated. The serpent's tooth wand spat a torrent of corrosive green acid. The star-shard scepter unleashed a shower of crystalline projectiles. Elmsworth's wand projected a kinetic barrier that shimmered in the air. He was using 3 legendary wands at once, a feat that should have been impossible, a symphony of destruction directed by a single malevolent will. Zara was brilliant. She moved like a dancer, her small frame a whirlwind of defensive charms and desperate counterattacks. She was a singular, focused point of light against a tidal wave of darkness. Finn, meanwhile, had scrambled behind a massive, discarded cog, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was useless. A spectator at the end of the world. He clutched the pouch containing the Heartwood core, his knuckles white. This was his fault. He had led them here. He watched, his cataloger's mind taking over, a desperate coping mechanism against the terror. He saw the spells, but he also saw the wands. The Rowan wand, when it cast a binding spell of living wood, flared with a soft green light. But as it did, Finn saw it, a barely perceptible flicker in the Aetherium tube connected to Elmsworth's wand next to it. A stutter. Malakor unleashed a concussive blast from a 4th wand, a brutal cudgel of force that sent Zara flying. She hit the far wall with a sickening crunch and crumpled to the floor, her wand clattering across the metallic ground. As I said, Malakor stated, turning his immense frame towards Finn's hiding place. Flesh fails. The cog Finn was hiding behind was lifted into the air as if it were a child's toy and tossed aside. He was exposed, pinned by the terrifying red gaze of the general. The core boy, the voice commanded. It is the final component I require. A focusing lens of unparalleled purity. With it, I can finally harmonize these disparate voices. I can perfect the choir. Finn's mind raced. Harmonize. Disparate voices. Choir. He saw it again in his memory. The concussive blast from the 4th wand, and as it fired, the serpent's tooth wand beside it seemed to discharge a tiny, undirected spark of acid that sizzled harmlessly on Malakor's own chassis. It was its tiny flaw. An imperfection. A note out of key. Malakor's technology allowed him to bypass the attunement, to force the wands to obey. But they were still the life signatures of other wizards. They were meant to be soloists, each with its own temperament, its own history, its own unique magical resonance. Malakor was forcing them to sing together, and they were fighting it. The strain was causing interference. Resonance backlash. It was a term Finn had read in a dusty tome on advanced artifice theory. It was dismissed as a purely theoretical problem, as no one had ever been mad enough to try and wield more than one foreign wand at a time. Until now. Malakor took a step, the floor groaning under his weight. Do not prolong this. Your sacrifice will serve a grander purpose. Finn looked from the approaching monster to Zara, who was struggling to push herself up, one arm hanging at an unnatural angle. They were beaten. Defeated. He was about to die. But in the face of certain death, a strange calm washed over him. He was a wand polisher. A nobody. But he knew these wands. He knew their histories, their temperaments, their quirks. He knew them better than the monster who wore them as trophies. No, Finn said, his voice a reedy tremor, but it did not break. The general paused. Insolence. They don't belong to you, Finn continued, finding strength in the conviction of his words. He clutched the pouch. The heartwood core within pulsed, a steady warm beat against his palm, as if agreeing with him. As if it, too, recognized the disharmony. A powerful force, a wave of pure telekinetic energy from Elmsworth's wand, slammed into Finn, lifting him off his feet and pinning him against the wall. The air was forced from his lungs. Black spots danced in his vision. The artifact does not grant you a voice, boy, Malakor droned, reaching for the pouch at Finn's belt with a pincer-like claw. It is merely an object. As the metal claw closed in, the heartwood core flared. It wasn't a spell. It wasn't an attack. It was a pure, unrestrained release of raw, untamed magical potential, the essence of 1,000 ancient forests unleashed in a single moment. The light was blinding, a wave of life and chaotic growth in a chamber dedicated to cold, sterile metal. The wands on Malakor's arms reacted violently. The sudden influx of pure, neutral magic was like a tuning fork struck in the middle of his discordant orchestra. They sputtered and sparked. The Aetherium in their conduits flashed erratically. Malakor staggered back, letting out a screech of distorted static, clutching at his own chassis as if in pain. The telekinetic grip on Finn vanished, and he dropped to the floor, gasping for air. Zara now, he choked out. Zara, driven by pure instinct, had already scrambled for her wand. With her good arm, she pointed it not at Malakor, but at the ceiling. A single, perfectly aimed severing charm struck a massive steam pipe overhead. With a colossal roar, superheated steam billowed into the chamber, obscuring everything in a thick white fog. This way, Finn yelled, grabbing her by her good arm and pulling her towards the chaos of the gantryways they had come from. Behind them, they heard Malakor's synthesized roar of fury, a sound of grinding gears and pure hatred that was nearly drowned out by the shriek of escaping steam and the alarms that now blared throughout the iron chantry. They fled, stumbling through the mechanical nightmare, the fortress now fully aware of their presence. They finally collapsed in a small, forgotten maintenance crawlspace, the sounds of the hunt echoing all around them. The adrenaline faded, leaving only pain and the bitter taste of defeat. Zara slid down the wall, cradling her broken arm, her face pale and etched with humiliation. We failed, she whispered, the words ragged. I couldn't even. He just brushed me aside. All my training for nothing. Finn knelt beside her, his body aching, his mind still reeling. They had failed. They had been brutally, utterly defeated. But as he replayed the confrontation in his mind, focusing on the stuttering lights, the misfired spark, the general's pained reaction to the core's pulse, a single, impossible thought took root. It was a whisper of an idea, born not of power or magic, but of simple observation. No, Finn said, his voice low but steady, cutting through her despair. He looked at her, his eyes, usually so full of fear, now holding a spark of something else entirely. A dangerous, desperate clarity. We didn't fail, Zara. We learned. He held up his hand, still feeling the phantom warmth of the core. His wands, they're not an orchestra. They're a choir where every singer is trying to drown the others out. He's strong, but his strength is unstable. He met her confused, pain-filled gaze, and the last vestiges of the timid wand polisher fell away, replaced by the archivist who had found the fatal footnote in the villain's design. "I think," Finn said, the words hanging in the tense silence of the crawl space, "I think I know how to break them." Chapter 4. The air in the maintenance conduit was thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the cloying scent of old grease. Every few seconds, a fat drop of viscous condensation would fall from a rusted pipe overhead, landing with a soft plink on the grated floor. It was a miserable, forgotten place, which made it the perfect sanctuary. Finn knelt beside Zara, his hands hovering uselessly over the gash on her arm. Her dueling robes, once a pristine shade of Concordium blue, were now torn and stained with soot and blood. She'd propped herself against the cold, curving wall, her breathing ragged. The bravado that had been her constant companion was gone, stripped away by the sheer, overwhelming power of General Malakor. They had faced him, and they had been swatted aside like insects. It was pointless, Zara rasped, her voice a ghost of its usual confident timbre. She winced as she tried to shift her weight. All my training, the years of incantations, the hours in the dueling circle. He just absorbed it. The Starfire bolt, Finn. It's supposed to be able to punch through a fortress wall. It barely singed his pauldrons. Finn said nothing. His mind wasn't on the fight they had lost, but on the seconds just before it ended. He was replaying the moment Malakor had raised his arm, a dozen wands mounted on his gauntlet flaring to life in unison. There had been light, a terrifying cacophony of raw magic, but there had also been something else. Something small. Something wrong. "He's too powerful," Zara continued, her eyes closed. "We can't fight him. No one can. We should have just kept running." "No," Finn said, the word coming out firmer than he expected. Zara's eyes snapped open, a flash of her old fire returning. "No? Did you not see what happened? We are outmatched, outpowered, and currently hiding in a sewer pipe. What part of our situation screams success to you?" "The wands," Finn said, his gaze distant. "It's the wands. I saw it." He turned to her, his own fear momentarily forgotten, replaced by the familiar spark of academic fascination. It was the same look Arch-Curator Elmsworth would get when identifying a rare glyph. When he channeled his power, they didn't just glow. They vibrated. Of course they vibrated, you turnip. They were channeling enough magic to level a city block. "Not like that," Finn insisted, leaning closer. It was a discordant vibration. A resonance bleed. I've seen it before on artifacts that are improperly stored or forced to channel a type of energy they weren't designed for. The residual magic creates a harmonic frequency, a waste product. We have to polish the resonance dampeners in the Concordium vault once a month to prevent it from building up. He looked down at his own hands, calloused from years of polishing, buffing, and cleaning. Hands that had never held a wand with any real purpose. Think of it like a musical instrument, Zara. A wand is attuned to its wizard. It's a perfect flute, designed to play one person's specific song. Malakor isn't playing their songs. He's just blowing a gale force wind through all of them at once. He gets a loud noise, yes, but the flutes are screaming. They're under strain. A flicker of understanding crossed Zara's face, chasing away some of the despair. So he's damaging them? Worse. He's creating instability. Each wand he uses leaves a tiny, imperceptible magical echo. A wrong note. But he's using hundreds. All those wrong notes, they're starting to harmonize with each other. Finn's heart began to beat faster, not with fear, but with the thrill of a puzzle piece clicking into place. His technology, the artifice that lets him wield them, it's a brute force solution. It doesn't account for the subtleties, for the arcane residue. He's built a magnificent engine, but he's been ignoring the exhaust. Zara pushed herself up straighter, the pain in her arms seemingly forgotten. And what happens when the exhaust builds up too much? Finn met her gaze, his eyes wide with the terrifying, beautiful simplicity of his idea. The engine breaks down. Catastrophically. He swallowed, the audacity of his own thoughts making his throat dry. We can't beat him in a duel. We can't overpower his magic. But we don't have to. We just have to make his own power turn against him. We can sabotage his collection. For a long moment, Zara stared at him. The prodigy, the duelist, the girl who believed every problem could be solved with a well-aimed spell, was being told their only hope lay in a theory of magical maintenance. It was absurd. It was insulting. It was also the only plan they had. Sabotage them how? She asked, her voice low. We can't even get close to his throne room again. We don't need to go to his throne room, Finn said, a frantic energy building in him. We need to go to his wand vault. That's the source. It's where he stores them, where they're all linked to his artifice network. If we can introduce a catalyst there, something to amplify the resonance bleed. He trailed off, his mind racing through the catalog of supplies he used to manage in the artifacts department. Polishing oils, crystalline dusts, harmonic tuning forks, he muttered to himself. Arch-Curator Elmsworth always said that Aetherium dust was a nightmare to store near enchanted items because it naturally amplified any ambient magic. He called it magical feedback in a jar. We used it to clean non-magical cogs because it was so abrasive. His head snapped up. That's it. Aetherium dust. It's basically powdered resonance. If we can get that into the vault's ventilation system, it will act like a tuning fork for all those wrong notes. It will force them into a single, escalating frequency. It won't be a slow build-up. It'll be a chain reaction. Zara's expression was a mixture of skepticism and grudging admiration. You want to defeat the most feared battle mage in Ethelgard by dusting? Not dusting, Finn corrected, a small, uncharacteristic smile touching his lips. Weaponized polishing. Getting back to the upper levels was a terrifying climb through the fortress's guts. They navigated catwalks suspended over chasms filled with grinding, house-sized gears. They scurried through boiler rooms where steam hissed from copper pipes, hot enough to scald flesh in an instant. Twice, they had to freeze in the shadows, pressing themselves into grimy alcoves as the rhythmic clank-clank-clank of a cog sentinel patrol passed by, its single, glowing red optic lens sweeping the corridor. During the ascent, their roles had completely reversed. Finn, now operating in a world of mechanics and infrastructure he understood, took the lead. He identified structural weaknesses, predicted patrol patterns based on the grease trails on the floor, and found passages Zara, with all her arcane senses, would have missed entirely. She followed, her silence a testament to her newfound reliance on him. She was the weapon, but he was the one aiming it. Their target was a small, unmarked service hatch Finn had spotted on an architectural schematic he'd once been forced to memorize for an inventory audit. It was located, ironically, right next to the grand, fortified entrance to the Wand Vault, and was likely used by low-level maintenance mechanics. They found it behind a tapestry depicting Malakor's hollow victory at the Battle of the Glass Plains. Zara stood guard, her borrowed wand held tight in her good hand, while Finn worked on the lock. It wasn't magical, just a complex series of tumblers. His fingers, nimble from years of handling delicate artifacts, probed and twisted a thin piece of metal he'd broken off a floor grate. Malakor's arrogance is his greatest weakness, Finn whispered, concentrating. He protects against magical assaults, brute force, divination, but he wouldn't think to protect against a janitor. The lock clicked open with a soft snick. They slipped inside. The small corridor beyond led to a ventilation intake grate, just as the schematic promised. Through its metal slats, they could see into the vault. It was less a room and more a cathedral of stolen power. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of wands were mounted on the curving walls, each held in a delicate clockwork clasp. Hues of oak, yew, willow, and more exotic woods gleamed under the cold, ambient light. At the tip of each wand, a tiny, almost invisible filament of silvery energy snaked upwards, joining a complex web that converged on a massive, throne-like chair in the center of the chamber. The air hummed, a constant, oppressive thrum of potential energy held in check. And on the throne sat General Malakor. He wasn't wearing his full battle armor. Here, in his sanctuary, his form was more exposed. His clockwork body was a masterpiece of brass and steel, intricate gears whirring softly beneath articulated plates. One organic, human eye remained, a stark contrast to the glowing red artifice on the other side of his face. He held a single, simple wand of rowan wood in his metal fingers, turning it over and over, studying it with a look of intense, almost painful longing. The heartwood core, Zara breathed beside Finn, her eyes fixed on the empty pedestal beside the throne. He knows it's not here. Malakor's voice, amplified by a hidden vocoder, echoed in the vast chamber. It was surprisingly quiet, laced with a cold fury. You cannot hide it forever, Elmsworth. Your little scavenger can't outrun me. The final piece will be mine. The weakness of flesh will be purged. I will be complete. He placed the Rowan wand back on a nearby rack with a reverence that was chilling. He was not just a collector. He was a worshipper at an altar of his own making. This was their chance. While he was distracted, lost in his obsession, Finn pulled a small, leather pouch from his belt. It was a polisher's kit he'd salvaged from the Concordium ruins, a final keepsake of his old life. Inside was a handful of the coarse, shimmering Aetherium dust. I need a distraction, Finn whispered to Zara. A big one. Something he can't ignore. It will only give me a few seconds. Zara nodded, her jaw set. She looked at the general, then back at Finn. For the first time, there was no disdain in her eyes, only trust. Give him my regards, she said. She stepped back from the hatch, took a deep breath, and slammed the pommel of her wand against a massive steam pipe running along the corridor wall. The resulting clang was deafening, echoing like a cathedral bell. Instantly, Malakor was on his feet, his red optic lens flaring to life. Intruders! His voice boomed, the quiet fury replaced by metallic rage. Show yourselves. While his attention was fixed on the grand entrance, Finn pried open the ventilation grate. The air being drawn into the vault was cool, smelling of filtered ozone. He held the pouch over the opening. You want a show, you tin-plated tyrant? Zara yelled from down the corridor, her voice magically amplified. She unleashed a torrent of spells, brilliant lances of pure energy, crackling shields of force, all directed at the main vault door. They impacted with thunderous booms, a spectacular but ultimately futile display. Malakor turned, a predator drawn to the most obvious threat. The prodigy. A foolish, final gesture. He raised a hand, and a section of the wall shimmered, a shield of pure force absorbing Zara's assault effortlessly. Now, with his focus diverted, Finn emptied the contents of the pouch into the intake. The shimmering Aetherium dust caught the air current and was sucked into the vent, a river of silver motes disappearing into the darkness. For a second, nothing happened. Malakor was still focused on the door, preparing a counterattack. Finn held his breath. Had he been wrong? Was his grand theory of arcane harmonics just the deluded fantasy of a glorified janitor? Then it began. A single high-pitched whine, starting from a U-wand on the far wall. It was a sound like a wet finger being dragged across the rim of a crystal glass. Another wand joined it, then another, then a dozen. The steady, oppressive hum of the vault began to waver, replaced by a rising, discordant chorus of squealing frequencies. Malakor froze. He tilted his head, his organic eye widening in confusion. The wands on the walls began to glow erratically, their gentle light flickering like dying candles. The silvery filaments of energy connecting them to his throne began to spark and spit, their color shifting from silver to a sickly, violent purple. What is this? Malakor snarled, turning from the door. A sonic attack? Primitive. It's not an attack, General, Finn whispered from behind the grate. It's a recall. The high-pitched whine escalated into a deafening screech. The light from the wands pulsed faster and faster, no longer illuminating the room but plunging it into a strobing nightmare of light and shadow. The very air grew thick, crackling with untamed magic. Cracks of raw power, like miniature lightning bolts, began to arc between the wands. Malakor looked at his own clockwork hands as they began to tremble, affected by the vibrational chaos. The network that allowed him to control the wands was now feeding the uncontrolled energy directly back into his own systems. Resonance cascade? Impossible, he roared, a flicker of something akin to fear in his voice. He reached for his throne, trying to activate a dampening field, but it was too late. The chain reaction was exponential. The energy overload was no longer just a possibility. It was an inevitability. A blue nimbus of chaotic energy erupted around his throne. We have to go. Now, Zara yelled, grabbing Finn's arm and pulling him away from the grate. They scrambled back down the service corridor, the fortress itself now groaning around them. The floor vibrated violently, and the sound from the vault was a physical pressure, a wave of noise and power that felt like it was going to tear the world apart. They burst out from behind the tapestry into the main hallway just as the grand vault doors buckled outwards, glowing cherry red from the unimaginable energies building within. Finn risked one last look back. Through the now glowing ventilation grate, he could see the scene inside. Malakor stood in the center of the magical maelstrom, his body sparking, arcs of energy lashing across his metal frame. The wands were shattering in their clasps, exploding into showers of splinters and raw magical force. But the general wasn't screaming. He wasn't being torn apart. He was laughing. A terrible, grating sound of metal on metal. With a gesture of pure defiance, he spread his arms wide. The chaotic, violet energy, the death screams of 1,000 stolen wands, was not dissipating. It was swirling inwards, drawn into the whirring vents on Malakor's chest plate. His singular red eye burned with an intensity that dwarfed its previous glow, a miniature star of pure malice. They hadn't just broken his toys. They had given him the raw, untamed material to build something new. Something worse. Finn's blood ran cold. They hadn't defeated him. They had unleashed him.